Very good question. We have an hour set aside for this conversation, and if we find that we've run out of time, we can pick it up again another day next week, when it's possible to have you in again, Keith. But I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. It's good to be here again. My name is Keith Thompson. I'm the Private Lands Program Manager with Vermont Forest Parks and Recreation. I love presenting on use value appraisal. I've been working in the program since 2003 when I started working as a consulting forester. For several years, ran my own business, and then became the county forester in 2011 before taking on this gig about 10 years ago. I love the program. Got some family land enrolled in the program, and it's really beneficial. But today I'm going to focus on the values that the program gives to landowners and how important it is for working lands. But to do that, I need to lay some groundwork with the importance of Vermont's forest land, and that can kind of ground us in how UVA supports landowners and these working land goals. We all know that Vermont's forests are incredibly important, but they're important for a lot of things. The scenery they provide, the recreational opportunities, the clean water, wildlife habitat, biodiversity, the working lands, the income that all that generates for us. So all of that is provided from our forest land. And every time we walk out our doors and drive to work, we benefit from what the forests provide. Vermont's forest economy has about 1.4 billion in direct output. It employs 9,100 folks directly, and with multipliers, it's about 13,800 folks with 2.1 billion in output. That is complemented by and complements the habitat and ecologically functional landscape. That's the values that when folks are out looking at wildlife, collecting fiddleheads, all of the things that we love to really enjoy in nature, and the values that they provide, that's because of an intact, connected, and diverse landscape. And Vermont Agency of Natural Resources has Vermont Conservation Design. A lot of folks are familiar with that. This is a map of those areas that are identified as really contributing to that landscape and those values that are going to support the suite of habitats, wildlife we all love, and the biodiversity we depend on. Carbon is a focal point for a lot of folks right now for good reason. And in 2022, the forest sector compensated for 67% of Vermont's statewide greenhouse gas emissions. That's a preliminary number that's coming from a new Vermont forest carbon inventory being done by Ali Kasiba. And so that might change a little bit. That's going to be published in the next couple of weeks. But we got an early sample of that to reflect on that. I know that there were some past discussions in the committee about carbon, and maybe there will be questions later on about that. And then, of course, water. And our forests are the best land cover for providing clean water, attenuating flood damage, and providing aquatic habitat. And while there may be aspects of forest management and other things that can impact done well, our forests will continue and do continue to provide clean water and all these values, while providing all the other values I just mentioned. All of these can be provided at the same time, not always maximized in the same place, but they can all be provided at the same time. I didn't mention every value that the forest provides. We've only got an hour, but just wanted to touch on a few of those. And so if we all agree that those are really important things, we need those from our forests, then where do they come from? Who's providing those? And Vermont's forests are owned by private landowners. 69% are family and individuals, 10% are other private ownerships, corporations, trusts, things like that. And so the federal, state, and local ownerships are really important and provide a unique and valuable and different suite of values. But private lands are the foundation of our forest base in the state. And so if private lands aren't providing those values, then we're not getting them.
Representative O'Brien.
Keith Local is what, town forest?
Municipal, yeah. And so when we're thinking about, well, so what does this mean? You look across the landscape like this picture on the left and you see a swath of land. Oftentimes the green blends in, but you look at a map and you start to recognize there's a bunch of different parcels here. And it's each one of these parcels is owned by an individual with their own connection to the land, their own objectives, their own financial circumstances. And then you get down to the individual parcel and there are circumstances on the ground that support or create new challenges or opportunities for how that land is going to be managed. And so the work of getting all those values I described is not a one size fits all strategy. It's a one by one strategy of helping recognize what the opportunities are on that land, understanding what the goals of those landowners are, and with the view of all the public values we depend on private forests for, finding where the match is. How do we support those personal and private goals and their individual circumstances, financial or otherwise, and support them in realizing their values and ownership while also providing all those other values that we depend on from forests. And so to kind of make that leap and build that bridge with landowners, we need to think about where are they coming from? Why do they own their land? Why do they care about it? So every year, the National Woodland Owners Survey, which is conducted by the U.S. Forest, the U.S. Forest Service, does a survey, and every few years they compile the results of this survey. This is was last compiled in 2018. And so you look at this and folks are really owning their land for the scenery, the wildlife habitat, the biological diversity, the privacy, the water resources. So that's one of the reasons why they come to the land. I want to call out that timber products and firewood are very low in the reasons for owning land. But that doesn't mean that those aren't incredibly important activities to support these other goals. Wildlife habitat, nature or biological diversity. What's not on here are some of the income goals that folks have, and so on.
So Keith, just looking at that,
Yes.
the number associated with for firewood or for timber products somewhere below 40%. Does that mean that 40% are actually harvesting timber, or are there people?
So what this means is, so there's a survey question that says from very important to not important at all, rank these reasons for owning land. And the people who were looking at this said that timber products were not very important for them. But there'll be some more slides that are really interesting. It doesn't mean that they aren't harvesting timber. It doesn't mean that that the timber isn't providing important values. And I think that this is a lot about what do people associate with timber harvesting? It may be that they're not looking to go harvest timber for the revenue. They may be going and doing a harvest to restore the forest, to support recreational opportunities, for all sorts of other values that do align with their goals. And it may be that harvesting saw timber is extremely supportive of making that cost effective, that they wouldn't do it without the value of the saw timber. And I think that's one of the really important messages, is that saw timber for the sake of saw timber is a really valuable goal. It's not the only goal, but saw timber for the sake of supporting other objectives and complementing other goals like climate adaptation, restoration, wildlife habitat, all those things. If that's paid for out of pocket, it's unaffordable. If it's paid for by the saw timber, it's win-win. And so that's one of the messages that we're giving to landowners and helping them realize their goals. without it being a really significant out-of-pocket expense while providing broader benefits. Is it good to go on?
Yes, thank you. That was helpful.
Good. So the top 5 concerns from the same survey for landowners, property taxes is number 1. Keeping land intact, number 2, dumping and vandalism, trespassing, and then insects and diseases. I'll back up briefly. So these surveys are focused on parcels that are 10 acres or more. And so that's the family forest landowner. So this is surveys that are inclusive of those lands that are eligible for UVA, but it includes some that are too small to be eligible. And I'll touch on eligibility for UVA in a little bit. So what does it take to manage forest land for all its values? For that list of values that I described, tree cover is a start, but it's not enough. And so as we gain tree cover in the state, that's a prerequisite to doing forest management. That's great, but there's a whole lot more that's necessary. So we don't get to pat ourselves on the back and say we've got a solid forest economy and working landscape just because we have trees. Landowners need the ability so you start with trees, you start with an intact forest. That's a prerequisite. That's kind of a landscape issue. But once we have that, if we hold on to it, then for every landowner, there are other requirements. They need to be able to keep their land intact. If they can't keep their land intact, they don't get to even take the next step. So they need to be able to afford it. They need to be able to hold on to it. Taxes are a big part of that. Personal circumstances are a big part of it. The other living costs that they're dealing with relative to their taxes are another part of it. And then what are their perceived benefits? So if it's zero cost, which it never is, but if it's a low cost and they have very little benefit from holding on to it, then maybe it's easy to sell it. Maybe it's easy to take the money that they can get from subdividing it and not having it be working lands. That gets easier. But if we can support the benefits that they receive, tangible or spiritual, emotional, whatever benefits that they might realize from their land, helps to balance that equation and help them hold on to that property. So helping them connect to their land and receive benefits is important. The opportunity to steward land is another really foundational piece. The opportunity to steward land means that there are people available who are skilled and will be able to support them in doing this work, that there is a market for the wood that they might cut. It's that there's a social license to do that activity in the first place. And so if there are no markets, if there's nobody to do the work that they're looking to do, it doesn't matter how much they want to do it. It's not going to happen. And so that's another thing. The opportunity to steward is a kind of both a parcel level, kind of a cultural or economy level requirement. And then a plan and motivation. You can have all these other things going for you, but if the landowner doesn't know what strategy they want to implement, and they aren't interested or motivated in doing it, it's also not going to happen, even if all the other things are in place. And so if we want working forests and we want all these values from forests that we listed, for every landowner, we want to have as many of these in place as we can. And it's not enough just to have the trees. It's not enough to just have the ability to keep it intact. We need all of it. And use value appraisal does an amazing job, and it touches on every one of these. So the statutory purpose of use value appraisal, I think we've gone over this a number of times, so I'm not going to belabor it, but it's preserving the working landscape, rural character, natural ecological systems of the state. And there's another layer of this that has a lot of different bullet points. And I'm, again, not going to touch on all of these, but we're looking to achieve a lot of goals at the same time. And it makes sense. Forests are complex. They have a lot of value. We don't want to favor one over the other. We have a way to do all of it, frankly. It takes work, but we can do all of it. But it does make it delicate that if we tweak this and focus on one aspect of UVA and its purposes and its ability to advance one goal, there's a domino effect that affects every other goal it has for the program. And we always need to be looking at our programs and thinking about how we can do them best. And they can be delicate, and it can require a lot of coordination and thoughtful work to figure that out. So I'll dig into a little bit of how we do this in the forest land side of the program. So again, backing up for context, the program has two main enrollment categories: agricultural land and managed forest land. Within managed forest land, there are several sub-enrollment categories. And the program is administered, as folks know, by Property Valuation and Review that do the taxation, eligibility, and agricultural side of things, and Forest Parks and Recreation that handles the forest land side of things. And I'll touch on exactly what is involved in that in a little bit. But the subcategories for managed forest land are productive forest land, reserve forest land, and conservation land. And Site 4 lands, open lands, and ecologically significant treatment areas. There are more beyond that, but each one of these categories has specific eligibility requirements, condition requirements, like is it a wetland or Site 4 soils? Can it be managed for saw timber? Reserve forest land is only eligible if a certain percentage of the parcel is in significant or sensitive conditions. And so just looking at this, it's helpful to think about the productive forest land is the vast majority of the program. All of those acres need to be managed for saw timber according to a forest management plan. Reserve forest land, which started, and I've got some stats on where we are with that. That was started a couple of years ago. We're only a year and a half into it, actually. We've got 25 parcels that are enrolling in that category. That land is managed for old forest characteristics with some specific strategies to do that. Conservation land is only eligible to 501c3s in the business of conserving land. So there's less than 200 acres enrolled in that, or excuse me, 200 parcels enrolled in that category. And then these other subcategories, Site 4 lands, open lands, ecologically significant treatment areas, you can see that those are very small portions of the program as a whole. Every property can be enrolled with, folks can mix and match based on what the conditions of their property are and what's eligible and what their management objectives are. And so folks will take that approach. In terms of eligibility, a property needs to have at least 25 acres of enrolled forest land, with a minimum of it being 20 of it being productive managed forest land. House sites and commercial developments aren't eligible. Management is approved by FPR. It's consistent with a management plan that they've developed. They need to prepare one once every 10 years, and they submit that with a map. And the plans and maps need to be consistent with the commissioner's minimum acceptable management standards. And so statute provides that authority. We update those incrementally. We're working on a pretty big overhaul of that right now. Lands that are eligible as ecologically significant treatment areas or reserve forest land do not need to be managed for sod timber as the primary management objective. They're managed for the specific conservation goals of an ecologically significant treatment area. Think riparian area along a stream, or rare, threatened, or endangered species habitat. They would be managed for those values. But again, there's less than 20,000 acres enrolled in those conditions across the state. Yes.
What was the open land designation for?
Open land is so on any enrolled forest land parcel, there can be up to 20% of the forested, 20% of that parcel can be open land. And so it's generally an open field. It is not lawn. Oftentimes there are areas that are brush hog. We know that forested parcels have openings, natural or man-made, but they're not manicured, maintained openings. And then site 4, wetlands are eligible, and there's not a limit on those on a parcel as long as all the other eligibility requirements are met for the parcel. In terms of use values, forest land is valued at $188 per acre, and if it's greater than 1 mile, then from a class 1, 2, or 3 road, it's 75% of that. And so last year it was $141. That's calculated every year by the Current Use Advisory Board. There is a use value formula that's basically looking at the per acre income generating potential of a property and ascribing it that lands at this value. The formula is established by rule. It's been used for several years. And at the very end, I've got that. I did a test run with this presentation yesterday, and it took about 10 minutes to walk through it, which I think detracted from some of the core messages of the presentation. And I do hope that if it's really important to dig into that we can create some additional time for that. So it was interesting listening to the Jill presented on the use values with property valuation review and presented this as savings. And Ezra presented on it and spoke to it as foregone revenue or cost. And I think that those are probably both accurate representations. And I'll add another one to the mix, that it is the difference in the tax rate. And the idea of this is that it is neither a savings nor an expense when it's equitable taxation. And there are a lot of folks who perceive this as, I don't owe more money if it's not developed. It's just equitable. And so it's neither a savings nor a cost. It's just a fix to a broad approach for taxation. And because we're calculating it, we can document the savings or the foregone revenue, and people can perceive it appropriately in different ways. But there are many who just see this as a necessary fix to a taxation system that rewards development and values taxation based on development value as opposed to maintenance as working lands. And so I'll just add that to the mix. Regardless of what we call it, the difference in taxes for somebody enrolled in the program is significant. And it is incredibly valuable for folks who are enrolled. A property that's 100 acres that's enrolled in the program. Let me just adjust my view here a little bit. Their annual taxes might be $376 per acre. And if that town's valuation of that property was $1,500 per acre, outside of enrollment, that property would be taxed at $3,000 per acre. And so the difference in that is $2,600 about. And so it's a real significant value to the landowner to be enrolled in the program, which, going back to that pyramid of how do we sustain working lands, that's foundational to the ability to keep the land intact. And changing that changes that formula for every landowner out there. In terms of parcels enrolled in the program, and I grinned a little bit, Representative Durfee, when you accurately recalled the approximate amount of land enrolled in the program. 55% of eligible forest land parcels are enrolled in the program. It's about 70% of eligible acres that are enrolled. And we did this calculation in 2022 in association with some of the analysis related to reserve forest land. This may have changed a little bit, but not significantly. I think this map is also just a good illustration of just the scale and the impact of this program across the state. In this, again, the green are the enrolled parcels, the pink are the potentially eligible but not enrolled parcels. What this says to me is that there is a significant potential for expansion of parcel enrollment. There's not as much potential, but there's still a significant potential for expansion of enrollment of acres. The reality here is that this calculation is based on today's parcels. We can always subdivide parcels, and so the potential eligibility of number of parcels can go up and up. But there is an acreage ceiling that will max out at.
Keith, if you added up, state forests, national forests, municipal forests, and everybody who's in use value, what percentage of our forest is that,
It's 4.5 million, so whatever 2 divided by 4.5 million is 2 million acres of forest land.
Is in current use,
Yeah, 2 million acres of forest land is enrolled in the program.
but then the state has 350, is it?
About 306, not all forest.
Yeah, and then federal.
Same or a little
No,
more?
400.
A little bit more, so we're getting up towards, it's a minority that's not either national, state, or current use, right?
I know that there's interest in where the reserve forest land is at, and during the reserve forest land discussion, there was a lot of concern about how this new category might detract from, at scale, from the working lands goal of the program. And during the whole process, there was a strong commitment to maintaining the working lands purpose of use value appraisal. And some of the eligibility criteria set in place were to put a backstop on that. To date, in that process, the backstop that were set up related to the percentage of a parcel that needed to be in significant or sensitive conditions. Basically, a parcel that is less than 100 acres needed to have 50% of their parcel in significant or sensitive conditions. And those conditions would need to be ESTAs, so old forest, riparian areas, RT&E habitat, steep slopes, Site 4 lands like wetlands. More than 50% of the property would need to be in those conditions for a property to be eligible as reserve forest land. A property that's 100 acres or greater needed to be 30% of those conditions. And so at this point, we've got 25 parcels. Interestingly, many of those parcels have a mixed management approach, being managed both for old forest and actively for saw timber. So many of them are being actively managed for old forest characteristics, and so they will have both the restorative value plus the economic benefits from that work. There was a big question during that conversation about how many new properties are going to come into enrollment and thereby increase the cost of the program as a whole. And so this is why this table on the right, enrollments in progress, 8 of the 25 properties are new enrollments, not previously enrolled properties. And so that's the current status. Frankly, I would like to see more enrolled in this because I think that it's a really valuable opportunity to talk about the role of active stewardship and old forests and the different ways we can support those goals. I also feel like we struck the right balance in terms of the eligibility and really ensuring that we maintain the working lands purposes of the program. So those properties that have the greatest opportunity to be managed actively for saw timber and other products continue to be managed for those values. And so we'll see where this goes, and we may do some work to figure that out. Sorry.
I'm just wondering how many, because you can sort of subdivide a previously enrolled property, so you could split it right up. So how many of those, did that happen, or were they just the whole chunk of it was placed? in
These,
reserve?
all of these were, we went from, so going from active management in the productive forest land category to reserve, there was no land transfer in these. This was just a change of management approach. And they did it either as an amendment to their plan, or their management plan was due for an update, and during that process, they tweaked it and shifted the enrollment categories.
So there wasn't like, say, 1,000-acre property where they amended it to put 100 in.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you were asking about like a legal subdivision of the property. A few had some acres that were reserve forest land, active or being managed exclusively for old forest, passively or actively. And some had portions of their land actively being managed for saw timber outside of the reserve forest land category. So folks are mixing and matching with that.
Representative Lipsky.
Thank you. Keith. You know, a few slides back, there was I just want to get this right, reserve forest land. If productive forest land was 92% of that was enrolled, this was 0.1%. Is that a misprint or that? So this is an incredibly tiny, and I won't say insignificant because the values, all values are
Thank you.
significant, but so if you combine certain unique ecological areas, steep slopes, other sensitive aspects, and you reach a certain percentage, can an enrollee, someone whose property is enrolled, opt out of active management if they hit a certain threshold from being required to be engaged with a management plan?
Of sorts. And it's not simply opting out. It is, they need to demonstrate that they have these conditions, that they will be managed for the ecological values that they provide. And if they do that, then they can enroll the land as reserve forest land, and they manage it for old forest, which is different from opting out of timber management. They are managing it for old forest. And there are different strategies to do that. There are requirements to deal with water quality, to deal with introduced plants or invasive plants. There are, in some cases, where the structural and species diversity, like in a plantation, is very low and conditions are light years away from old forest conditions. Landowners may be mandated to actively manage that site for structural and species diversity. And so they aren't managing for saw timber. They may not be managing for saw timber in those cases, but it's not just opting out.
Thank you. That's a good clarification. But if you want to create an odd age structural forest, they may be required to do so.
Yeah.
And then the big difference, obviously, is that those are costs to the landowner. There's no stumpage offset.
They may be, except as I mentioned before, the value of the wood can often pay for that work. They can be actively managing for saw timber while making an income, or actively managing for old forest characteristics by selling the saw timber, harvesting trees carefully and intentionally to cultivate that structure, and making an income. There are other ways and resources available to support that. So it can be an out of pocket expense. It doesn't always have to be.
I mean, my concern as an advocate for the working forest community working lands, is access to help sustain that working lands economy and all the diverse values that stewardship can actually improve and support all those diverse values.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Go ahead, John, and I think we should probably move on.
Okay, sorry. No, I was just, from what we saw yesterday, it'd be interesting. I mean, there must be places with our middle-aged forest where it almost makes more sense to cut holes like we saw yesterday, or almost clear cut and start over, right? Because we're thinking in long terms if you want those old forester characteristics, right? So it's interesting how all our middle-aged forests, the management plan to get to old forest characteristics must vary a bunch.
Absolutely. So in terms of a snapshot of what are we doing, some numbers related to program delivery. Our county foresters review 2,000 forest management plans a year. We visit 650 to 1,000 properties per year, and that's to both evaluate conformance with program requirements, use value appraisal. It's oftentimes the greatest value is supporting that landowner and connecting to their land and supporting them in implementing management activity. Candidly, we aren't meeting our statutory target for inspections. We're asked to inspect a property once every 10 years. And that would mean that we would be doing 1,700 property visits annually. But to meet these other requirements of program administration and so on, we're falling behind, unfortunately. And I'll touch on strategies we're using to try to get that back up and add value to those visits that we do. We also do a lot of maintenance of documentation. So even if a property is already enrolled, there are 1,500 property transfers per year. Every time a property changes hands, there's documentation associated with that we need to handle. A really important point here, every time a new property is taken over, the education, the relationship, the management, the stewardship history associated with that starts over. And so a new landowner is starting from square one in their connection to that land and their understanding of what's going to work, what's not going to work, what their opportunities are. So it's a real opportunity. It's also a real challenge to navigate the property transfers that have been occurring at an increasing rate, really since COVID. Broadly, and related to the social license aspect of our work, the broad public needs to understand and support forest management, not just broadly for public lands or so on, but private landowners and their neighbors need to be supported in their ability without risking or being concerned about bad relations as a result of their management. That's one aspect of this, and our county foresters do about 300 presentations annually. We've got 3,000 folks or so coming to these. Sometimes they're indoors, oftentimes they're outdoors on private land or on town forests, helping get people exposure to working lands, to restoration management, to forestry, and getting connected to foresters and loggers. Consulting foresters are the primary messenger on this. There are about 150 consulting foresters throughout the state. They are the ones who prepare forest management plans. They are the ones often who supervise and support landowners through an active harvest. Vermont County foresters are often the messenger to listen to and help landowners recognize what their opportunities are, and give them a impartial opinion about how they might approach their stewardship. There are other really important partners that support private landowners as well. NRCS, Vermont Fish and Wildlife, Vermont Coverts and Tree Farm folks, and Audubon Vermont. This is our team. We've got 13 county foresters. They're divided by north, central, and south. This past year, we had a handful of folks leave, so we've got some new faces here. And I'm not going to go through all of them right now. I wish I could. They definitely deserve it. But they're an amazing, really committed team to work with. A lot of times when we talk about the current use program, we talk about the specific savings that landowners receive, if we want to use that word. We talk about the working lands, the products that they harvest. There are extended benefits, and the National Woodland Donor Survey in 2014, we did some extra work to evaluate what's the difference between folks who are enrolled in the program or not enrolled in the program. And questions are like, if you're enrolled in the program, what's the likelihood that you have a management plan over somebody who's not enrolled in the program? And as a requirement of the program, it makes sense. Folks who are enrolled in the program have a forest management plan far and away more often than folks not enrolled in the program. The advice piece, this bar is interesting because this isn't a tangible or kind of easily described benefit of the program, but I think it's one of the core benefits of the program, that landowners get connected to foresters, to loggers, to folks who know how to think about forests and help landowners know how to think about forests so that they can take action on their own land and see opportunities for themselves that connect them to their land and see value in it, financial or otherwise. Landowners enrolled in the program take advantage of cost share, higher degrees, utilize easements more, or get green certification more. So these are all, it's hard to say if it's cause and effect or if it's just correlated, but folks enrolled in the program are taking advantage of these opportunities that we know are foundational to stewardship of private lands.
Excuse my ignorance, but what is green certification?
It's like Sustainable Forestry Initiative or FSC. So it's basically certification where the products harvested from that property can be sold at a premium by certain buyers. There isn't a direct requirement in the current use program for recreational aspects, but we know that private land is important for Vermont's economy, and UVA enrolled land does play an important role in supporting it. We did a kind of back of the napkin analysis to look at the number of parcels that intersected public trails. We found that 4,000 UVA parcels at the time, those parcels comprised more than 1 million acres, hosted trails. I think it's important to note that while many of these UVA parcels host trails and they provide significant value, this image on the right depicts that those trails are largely not supported entirely by UVA enrolled parcels. And so supporting those trail systems really requires involvement of non-UVA parcels. So just wanted to flag that part. We can be really proud of our work in Vermont, and I could have had 6 of these slides demonstrating how Vermont stands out among the rest of the country in our work. I chose just to do one, but the percentage of private land acres where the landowner has a forest management plan, you can look up at Vermont, and we stand out as among the highest in the country for forest lands in the state that are subject to a forest management plan. The next one I would have included is the percentage of landowners who have taken steps to implement their forest management plan. Again, same picture. Vermont stands out nationally. The next one would have been percentage of landowners who have actively sold timber in the last 5 years. Again, Vermont stands out. It doesn't mean we can't do more. We should do more in all of these areas, but we're doing it well, and we should hold on to that. It's a real strength. The program has been growing for a long time. Since its start in 1980, it's continually grown. We've got about 2 million acres enrolled, about 40,000 in conservation, and about 5,500 in agricultural land. As it's grown, Since 2003, we've had a 43% increase in acres, but a 70% increase in parcels. And that's really important. There's a fixed cost of administering this program per parcel. And as smaller parcels are enrolled or parcels are subdivided, the cost of administering this program per acre is going up. It's a challenge we're dealing with, and we're dealing with it in a few different ways. Forgive this picture. I don't like the picture, except
I like the black bears.
yeah, we digitized 16,000 forest management plans. And it was a major effort during COVID so that we no longer needed to be in the office to administer the program, and that we could allow people to submit things digitally. This past year, we did a county forester redistribution. Some folks may be aware of this. The county forester organization has been around since the 1940s. But one of the primary roles of county foresters is to administer use value appraisal. And the county is a terrible boundary to distribute workloads through. We had some folks who had 750 UVA enrollments, others that had 1,900. And so with a few county foresters stepping away, as hard as that was, it also created an opportunity to shift things around. We moved the Bennington County Forester's position up into the area of Southern Caledonia. Everybody now has 1,200 to 1,400 parcels consistently, and it's making a huge difference, allowing county foresters to provide consistent service across the state. Other really important changes we're making. Hannah Dallas is a county forester. She developed a mobile inspection system. Historically, our inspections on UVA parcels were hard copy or just PDFs. We had no way to aggregate the data, and it was really inefficient to use that inspection to communicate with the landowner and help educate them. With this new system, we're identifying what their priority goals are and interests are. We're documenting the data, we're able to aggregate it, but we're also able to automatically create PDFs that send the priority information to them in an email really efficiently, as opposed to needing to go back to the office and create a custom document each time we do one of these. We're creating a new submission portal for management plans, which will really improve our efficiencies. Currently, we require hard copy maps to be submitted. And that is a real cost, especially if the hard copy map needs corrections, and then they need to submit additional ones. That's gonna change our administrative costs. It's gonna change costs for landowners and foresters and reduce everybody's costs. So we're excited about that. We're currently in the process of updating the minimum management standards. That's gonna be a real value for folks. And current use advisory board rule, that's not an FPR change, but the current use advisory board is updating their rule. In conclusion, use value appraisal does a lot for forests and working lands. It supports affordability at the base of that, but it supports the supply of forest products and demand for services. That is foundational to the opportunity to steward any lands in the first place. It mandates planning. That brings people to action in ways that you just won't get if you don't have planning. And it facilitates education and engagement with professionals, which really supports that motivation and ensures that landowners find a way to align their values with actions that realize multiple values. Whenever we're thinking about a change, we're really striving for stability. It's essential for conserving and protecting working lands in Vermont, but it's complex, it's foundational, it works, and people depend on it, but it takes a ton of work and the margins are really tight. And so whenever we're working on a change, we're always thinking about how do we do this in a way that keeps things moving forward in the direction that we need to. So I'll conclude there.
Great, thank you. We are out of time. I know there's another slide, but we'll come back to that another day if that's okay with you.
That's okay.
Okay, good. Questions?
everyone on farm.
Yeah.
You know, we often talk about how our farmers control and manage a lot of forests. So in that 2 million acres in current use, you know, what percentage of that is actually sort of parts of active farms in Vermont?
I haven't done that analysis. We work with farmers all the time. We support farmers navigating their agricultural enrollments all the time because we are the face of UVA, the public face. But they're a really important partner and land manager in the state of forest land. Makes me curious. It'd be pretty easy to run, and I can get that number for you.
The $1.4 billion figure you gave earlier about directly from forest land, is that logs, firewood, what is that?
I believe so. I wish Catherine Servideo were here, who understands these numbers a bit better than I do. I believe.
Somewhere in that,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, thanks.
Keith, you mentioned earlier that you're not able to inspect as many parcels as we would all like you to be inspecting. When you do inspect them, can you tell us how often is there data? How often you run into a parcel that's not being managed according to the plan?
I could, in terms of, so there's a lot of parcels that are, start over. The vast majority of parcels are spot on with their management. They're doing exactly what's prescribed. There are some parcels that are moving away from what's being prescribed by degrees. And there's not a lot of black and white when we're stewarding land. And I would say that we've had fewer recently, but about 6 properties per year out of the 1,000 visits that we do are being removed for violations for the program. The others that we run into, we're talking about, we got to get more water bars on these trails would be an example of the kind of thing where we're not rushing to removal from the program, but we are holding folks accountable to the requirements of the program. Or you said that you do an activity here and you haven't done it yet. Either you need to implement it or you need to amend your plan. And if that's appropriate, then we can approve that.
Are there landowners who aren't cutting when they should be and would point to market or availability of somebody to actually come in and do the project? Do you run into that?
There are some, and I think those who are committed to actively managing, they'll hold off for a couple of years and find a way to do it. And others who are struggling to get it done for other reasons, we find a way to help make it happen is our approach.
All right. I think we'll stop then for today. Thank you. And we'll reach out and see if we can schedule you